Hi guys, Lindsay here with Storybook Family Farm. So in this past week, I've actually been doing a lot of reflection of just how far Tracy and I have come. Part of that is because we did just celebrate our 10-year wedding anniversary, so it did kind of, add to the whole, thinking back as to where we've come from and how far we've come and stuff. Like thinking about how when we first moved in together, like we lived in a very small, like 2-bedroom basement apartment, and how we had no idea like what the future would hold for us or that we'd ever even want to farm. Like both of us grew up doing like a little bit of like agricultural type of stuff. Like my family always had a big garden, and did some like food preservation and stuff, but more so just like making jams, jelly, spaghetti sauce, and then freezing some stuff. We always did buy in bulk, but like it wasn't really necessarily homesteading. Like nowadays it would be considered homesteading, but back then it wasn't like we were a small farm or anything really. We just had a really big garden. Um, and Tracy grew up doing pretty much the same thing of like gardening and that. And then she also, her grandparents, they had owned a really large dairy farm. So she has a lot of experience with dairy cows and stuff. But like both of us, like, when we met each other, like we talked about how neither of us ever actually wanted to garden ever again. We didn't want to have a farm. We didn't want to do anything like we're doing right now. And yet here we are, like actively reaching towards, a further degree of self-sufficiency, having a legitimate farm and stuff. Like we have pretty much everything except for pigs, cows, alpacas, and llamas. Like we don't have emus. Like that's about it. And we don't have sheep. Everything else though, we got pretty much the whole thing covered, including having honeybees. I mean, we have pretty much it all is going on. Um, and we're to the point now that we would definitely consider ourselves like legitimate bona fide like homesteaders and stuff, which seems kind of strange because it wasn't until 2019 that I had actually ever really like heard of the phrase homesteader. You know, when I was younger and stuff, this is what I would just envision as like a small scale farm, but like the terminology has changed a lot in my lifetime and stuff. But it just back in 2019 we had our first like legitimate garden. It was a very small garden, and that was when I had actually learned how to start processing food and preserving food. That is when I learned to make spaghetti sauce. We learned about making salsa, not from tomatoes we grew. We bought the tomatoes from somebody that we knew. They were selling them for a relatively cheap price for large canning quantities. So we decided that, we only had 4 tomato plants. 2 of them were cherry tomatoes. The other 2, the roosters are close by, sorry. But the other 2, they were beefsteak tomatoes, and they died before they even produced anything. Like we were not expert growers at this point at all whatsoever. So we had learned how to can some basic stuff, and I was really super pumped and proud of myself because I had grown enough green beans to can 13 quarts, and I was just like, oh my god, this is gonna like last us for forever. I'm gonna be so excited and all this stuff. It lasted for less than like a month. Our family really enjoys green beans, but so from that point there, I had realized that I really enjoyed canning stuff and making things from scratch. And so the next year, for 2020, we had decided that we were going to do a much larger garden, and it had nothing to do with the pandemic. Like it was just, I really discovered that I really enjoyed gardening again and growing our own food and canning it and turning it into something that was different than what you could get at the store. So from there, we had turned our small 1/4 acre lot in town into kind of like a big garden. Like we had 2 different garden spaces, and they weren't like huge or anything like that, but we were really proud of ourselves. We had grown enough tomato products and stuff to basically sustain us for the next year on our own homemade, homegrown spaghetti sauce and salsa. And it felt absolutely amazing to be able to do that. And then we decided that we needed more. So we ended up getting some chickens. The town that we lived in, we weren't supposed to raise chickens at all. So we hid them in our garage. We got Bantam chickens because my grandfather, he had a bunch of chickens and stuff. He had told us that the Bantam roosters, which you can hear now, they're nowhere near as loud as a full-size rooster. So it would be much easier for us to basically hide having them in our garage, and it'd be less likely that anybody would hear them, which we did successfully hide them. And then we decided that we wanted to also invest in something that we could raise our own meat with, because in the height of 2020, things were starting to get a little bit sketchy. So Tracy had eaten rabbit whenever she was young, and they had raised a few rabbits when she was young as well and stuff, but not anything like any sort of big, legitimate, like self-sufficiency type of raising of meat. So we decided to get some meat rabbits. we also hid them in our garage as well. It was a 2-car garage, thank God. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been enough room for a lawnmower. Like, it started getting pretty cramped pretty fast. And then that following year, we canned a lot more stuff. We expanded the garden even larger to where we really couldn't expand much further. So while all this was going on, both of us had a desire to move out to the country, to have more land, because we realized that we actually both really enjoyed gardening at our own pace without having like a parent or anything like that telling us how they wanted it done. That we could just have the creative liberty and the freedom to just do it how we wanted and how we felt that we thought that it should go and stuff, and we could add as many flowers as we wanted to make it beautiful. And so around the beginning of 2020, this was before things got crazy, we started talking about moving out of town, moving to get more land. And around that same point, we started noticing the housing market started getting a little out there. So we had kept looking and looking and looking, and we actually looked and grew in our very small lot. We grew as much as we possibly could. We grew probably about 75% of our family's vegetable needs for the year, and that was just for a family of 3. So it's not like anything crazy and stuff. We do have 3 children, but 2 of which are adults, so they don't count in this scheme. So we grew pretty much 75% of our own food, our own vegetables in town. We then also bought stuff at like farmers markets, flea markets, grocery stores, and that sort of a thing. When they were on sale, we could buy in bulk, so then we could can a lot of the stuff. So a lot of things, they were bought at a very cheap rate that were then preserved. Once we did that for a couple years, we really basically got to a point where we could not handle living in town and growing in town for another season. And it really, really weighed on us that we could not find any place to live. We had looked at raw land, we had looked at houses for sale, we had looked at stuff that was just barely outside of town that only had like a half an acre. We had looked at stuff that had like almost an acre, stuff that had an acre or 2, and it was just, everything was like beyond our price range and stuff, because we are also a very low income family. Like, we are good with money and we're frugal and we save money and all that stuff, but like when stuff that normally would cost $50,000 suddenly became like $150,000, that's kind of insanity and stuff, especially when your wages aren't increasing to keep up with that rate of inflation. So basically about 2 years ago, almost to the day, we decided that we could not take it for another growing season. We couldn't do it. We couldn't handle having neighbors right up, like, for lack of a better term, right up our asses. We couldn't do that and stuff. We couldn't handle being so limited on space to where we felt like we couldn't even breathe. We had no room to grow. We had no room to function. We couldn't cope with it anymore, of being so scrunched and having such a desire to try different foods, to wanting to raise different animals and stuff. It was too much. So we had actually talked to Tracy's parents. They have a good bit of land, and they do live locally too. We had actually talked to them about us putting a camper there and selling our house and living there until we found another piece of property. So at that point, I was pretty sure that both of us were absolutely insane and a bit sleep deprived. But they said yes. And I talked to my sister and I'm like, please tell me if like this is a terrible idea, because she's always been a really good voice of reason. And she's like, honestly, with you guys' circumstances, your financial outlook, all these different things going on in your life, she said, I think that's your only option. I'm like, this is weird. Like, normally she's never one to be like, yeah, take that big leap of faith, go crazy, like do these things. She's always slow, cautious, always my voice of reason. Every time I get a big crazy idea, she's the first person I call, because I'm like, is this just a crazy idea or should I do this? Like, what do I do? And most of the time she's like, don't do it, that's crazy. A lot of times still do it anyways, and then she tells me, I told you not to do it. But yeah, so for my sister to tell us that she thought that was our best option, it really gave us a lot of forward momentum. So we actually went and we took a loan out of Tracy's 401k, which was a very meager amount of money and stuff in there, because low income, not a very big income coming in, not a very high amount that can come out for the 401k. So we took a loan from her 401k to buy a camper, because we couldn't afford to get a regular type of loan and stuff, because we couldn't do it. So that's how we ended up getting a camper. We bought a 34-foot camper that was essentially like a 2-bedroom type of thing. Our room was on one side, and there was a small bunkhouse on the other side, and then the center area was like a living space with a kitchenette and like a little living room type setup jazz thing. So I ended up remodeling that so then that way it would be a comfortable stay for us, because Tracy, she would not do this plan with me unless if I made it feel like a home. So I ended up completely remodeling it, making it look really nice and fancy and cute in there and everything, so that way it would be nicer. This whole time we were convinced that it was going to take us 3 months tops. Like, that was all it was going to take, was 3 months. That was the most it could possibly take us to find our place. So we signed up to do a farmer's market throughout this whole thing, because we were convinced that we were going to have plenty of time to also start another garden at Tracy's parents' house, and that it was going to be wildly successful because our garden in town was extremely successful for how small of a space it was, albeit I did put a lot of rabbit manure and do a lot of composting in it to really help benefit the soil and boost it a lot. But I had thought, okay, it's the same principle no matter where you go. It's going to be simple. But along the way, everything fell apart. The wheels basically completely fell off, and I had to rely on one of my other homesteading skills, which is baking bread, in order to actually have a product to take to the farmer's market. So that's how I ended up starting our business, was by failure. So that was definitely a really big challenge, which I've talked about that in other videos of how challenging it was to start a bread baking business while using a teeny tiny camper oven that I could only bake 2 loaves of bread in at a time. So that was pretty much insanity. So all the while, we kept thinking that any day we would be able to find our place. And then it started getting cold out. And then we started getting really depressed. Things started getting really, really, really difficult. It ended up taking us about 10.5 months till we found the place that we're at now. Those were the hardest 10.5 months of my life. And then once we found this place, it took us another month to be able to move in and stuff like that for closing and to get it ready and all that stuff. But that 11.5 months of living in the camper was honestly the hardest of my life and stuff, especially the first 10.5 months. Like, once we found our place and we knew that this was where we were going, it suddenly became a lot easier, because then we could focus on just packing things up, getting the animals ready to move, getting everything ready to go and stuff, and then dreaming of what we were going to do. Because when we sold our house in town, that was at the height of the real estate market, like the big boom of it. So we ended up selling it for a pretty hefty profit. And so that pretty much opened a lot of doors for us whenever we were ready to look at buying something, which was pretty much right after we moved into the camper. So we looked at raw land, we looked at several different houses, we looked at stuff that you could buy with only cash, stuff that you could buy with a mortgage, anything in between. We were not picky. We had like a huge 1 hour radius of where Tracy was working at, and we couldn't find anything that entire time. Like, we had made offer after offer after offer on places, and it all just kept falling through. Meanwhile, we still were hoping, and it just, honestly, it felt like a big pipe dream. We were hoping that somehow, some way, we would be able to find something that was kind of local to our area that we could somehow pay cash for and stuff. And that ended up being exactly what we did. So we ended up finding this homestead. It has 2 acres of land. It has a small 2-bedroom house on it with a small rundown barn in the back. And it was within our cash budget, barely. Like, it took us every single penny that we had to be able to scrape and scrounge to be able to afford to buy this place. And it needed a massive, massive amount of work. And that leads us to where we're at now. Like, we have been here in March it'll be a year. So we've been working on this place pretty much around the clock, trying to get things done here, trying to get things established, trying to get things going and stuff. But it has absolutely been worth every single bit of struggle to get to here and stuff, to look back and to realize how absolutely crazy you were to how crazy we were to be living comfortably in town, still having this dream and this hope, and then to be nope, let's just get rid of everything that we have. We donated pretty much everything, every piece of furniture except for my dresser, our table, and a cedar chest. Everything else we donated. We kept our clothes and anything that pertained to homesteading, and that was pretty much it. So it seems absolutely crazy to have gone through such a big, tremendous, life-altering journey just to get to where we're at. I have not ever followed I've never even read anything that Dave Ramsey has put out, but I've heard plenty of other people quoting him saying that, live now like no one else so that way in the future you can live like nobody else. And like I think back to our days in the camper and us being so brave and so foolish, I suppose you could say, and stuff, just leaping out of blind faith and stuff, that everything would turn out fine. Like that was the craziest thing that we could have ever done. And now we don't know anybody else in our lives at all that owns their house without a mortgage. Like I am almost 32 years old and we do not have a mortgage. The only debt that we have is a car payment. Like, and it's because our car died while moving in here. Like, we had another vehicle and it literally, all four brake lines blew in the driveway of the house while we were moving in. So that is the only reason that we actually have any debt. But it's been a really crazy journey. But in saying all of that, if you guys have any sort of big crazy dream that you like have this hunch that it's going to work out fine and stuff, like honestly, no matter what anybody tells you, you should really try to go for it, because like we are living proof that sometimes the craziest thing you could ever do lead you to the best places and stuff. Like granted, where there's only 2 acres here, and we would have loved to have like 5 to 10 acres. Like when we first started looking for land, like that's what we were hoping for, like when we still lived in town and stuff. But honestly, on 2 acres, you could, for a small family, you could do everything that you could ever possibly need. Like you might not be able to have a milk cow, but you could have several milk goats, which we do. We do like the goats. They're quite fun. But you can do a lot of things in just 2 acres of land and stuff. But yeah, I just want to encourage you guys that if you are having some sort of crazy wild dream of wanting to do something, sometimes the most weirdest path to get there is the best path. It's the only really way to get there and stuff if nothing else opens. Sometimes you gotta create your own opening. But so if you guys are enjoying this content, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends on social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to help us grow. We'd greatly appreciate it. All right, thanks for watching. Have a good one, guys.